Hi guys, welcome back to the channel with my good friend Dr. Mark Bull. Mark is an expert in 3D. He's a biomechanist, so we're able to explore some very specific movements. And then today we're actually going to talk about one of the measurements, the pelvis and lead arm stretch, and then how that can help you hit better shots and potentially hit a little bit further.
Thanks, Tom, and it's always a pleasure seeing and spending time with you. So thank you so much again for the invitation. So yes, this idea of the kind of pelvis kind of lead arm stretch. So again, to provide the listeners with context, the idea of the kind of the lumbar spine pelvis thorax separation, the X factors, it was very informally known, it is a very well-known story, but those stretches happen across every kind of segment in the human body, the foot, hip and knee. One of the biggest or most influential ones and the biggest contributors to speed would be, as you say, that kind of lead arm kind of rib cage stretch, for example, in downswing. So I think what we have to acknowledge initially is more the kind of mechanism behind that. What is it actually happening to encourage that lovely kind of pelvis, lead shoulder, kind of lead hand stretch that we see? So there's kind of two ways we can explore this. There's a lateral component to that separation alongside a rotational one. Often you'll find players may have a bit less of this and a bit more of that and a bit more of that and a bit less of this. So some guys may do it more through rotation, less lateral. Yeah. Some guys do it through less lateral, more rotation. But invariably, in my experience, for the most advanced guys, it's a bit of both. So again, just for Cameron, before you and I start to explore this, or let's actually do it live with you actually, okay. Ty. So just take your start position forward and just go to your top of your backswing and stop. So there's a tremendous lateral contributor to that kind of shoulder stretch and transition. It's the ability to glide the pelvis and move the pelvis laterally towards the target as the hands are almost in transition, moving still away from the target. So that little pelvis hand stretch, pelvis glides towards the target, hands are still moving in the early phase of downswing. That creates a lateral separation, which is a tremendous contributor to then the idea of that lead arm compressing or adducting or stretching onto that rib cage. Yeah,
and it's amazing how much load you feel in the tissues when you do that movement. So it's like, you know, it's something I definitely have worked on before, and it's, you know, something some players might do more than that, some maybe do a little bit less, but you're going to usually see a bit of that movement to create energy, correct?
For sure.
Yeah.
So that kind of lateral, in that very playful definition, no one's ever saying you move this in any way, Ty, but to give a very extreme example for the viewers, as we move in transition, the pelvis moves towards, the hands move away, and that's a tremendous mechanism behind then. The rotation that then happens across that shoulder joint, rib cage, for example, creates that stretch. The other part of the story is then the rotational component. It's the ability for the rib cage in transition to rotate into that kind of lead arm. So from the target line view, and we'll get you to do this shortly. So you move in transition, how the rib cage rotates into that lead arm. For your viewers, and I'm sure this is the case of almost all, who are extremely aware, wonderful education, great awareness, there's actually an order to that. It's the idea of lateral rotation. So to make it very precise, you have that lateral separation, and the rib cage then rotates into that lead arm. It's a tremendous resource within the movement influence around then things like clubhead speed.
And then this would, you know, sort of, you've probably heard sequencing, terms like that could factor into what, you know, sort of order this would happen in. Yeah. Correct?
I mean, there's actually a sequence of sequences, believe it or not. I'm going to go into some fun stuff. Yeah. There's a sequence to the sequences. In one example, be it's lateral rotation. It's the pelvis hand lateral separation, followed by the rotation of the ribcage onto that lead arm, which in real time kind of looks something kind of like this. Yes. It's a very quick movement. It's the pelvis glides, then the ribcage rotates into the lead arm. It's a huge provider of that lovely recoil, rebound, stretch, speed, which is produced with that lead shoulder.
No, I like that. So it's here, and then I'm going lateral, and then the rotation is into the shoulder.
Very much. The ribcage in some ways collides onto that lead arm. And then the final part of that story then becomes how quickly then, once you achieve that peak stretch, the lead arm kind of rebounds and recoils off the rib cage. So it's like the X factor stretch as we start the tutorial, that how quickly the rib cage catches up. It's the same then with the kind of lead arm, and once you produce that movement, how quickly then that lead arm then rebounds off that rib cage is another part of the kind of story around that lead arm pelvis shoulder stretch.
Any drills that you like for this specific movement if you want to work on this pattern?
For sure. So I use one which is again a very playful reference. You can do it on your own, which is always nice. You don't need a third party to help. Kind of thumb and finger in this position. So maybe you and I can do this together. So without the club and hand initially, Ty, just to play with this. So thumb kind of middle of rib cage, kind of thumb on the belly of the bicep. And as you move through backswing and tie, just going to be mindful of keeping that space somewhat the same.
Yeah.
As you glide the pelvis in transition to the target, then start to use that rib cage then to make the thumb and the space between thumb and finger reduce in transition. Can you, and this has been the important part, can you move the thumb towards the finger rather than the finger towards the thumb?
Much different.
So you close the space. So again, it's very much moving the thumb into the finger, which is then using that rib cage and spine.
Because I could just move my arm against my chest, quite a bit different feeling, yes.
That's a very, so okay, and this is where you mentioned 3D values. You can achieve the same value on a measurement device like it's 3D motion capture, but it's how they move to produce that value is very different. One is in essence just compressing the arm.
Yes.
What's happening through the tissues, the joints, for example, kind of less active compared to the one we discussed there. You may produce the same amount of stretch, but in a very, very different physiological way.
Oh, it's massively different, because when I do this, I don't really feel anything. When I do ribs, so I get the stretch, and then I go rib narrowing into the arm, it's like everything's lit up. Tons of, I feel like it's like way more work through the body, which ultimately can transition out to the club. So it's going to give you a huge, again, looks can be deceiving, right? So you want it, there's some feels in here that you're going to have to work for, but I think that is an incredible drill that can help a lot of people. Oh man, yeah, that's a good spot to hit it from.
Fantastic.
Awesome, Mark. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. I hope this helps you. Again, start slow. Everyone's a little bit different. You can work on this movement, though, if you're working on sequencing and then trying to create a little bit better sort of pelvis lead arm stretch, or understanding how you're going to produce a bit more energy in that transition. Thanks to Dr. Mark Bull for joining us today.
My pleasure, Tyler.
Awesome.